out of the Supreme Court. In a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court held that the Trump administration's effort to end the popular Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, or DACA as it's commonly known, was not allowed under the Administrative Procedure Act. The Trump administration has already announced that it will refile the case, but we are still not quite clear on what that looks like or means. To talk about what happened with DACA and what will happen next, we are joined here today by Representative Pramila Jayapal, the Congressional Progressive Caucus co-chair, and the Congressmember from Washington's 7th District. She serves on the House Immigration and Citizenship Subcommittee, and she is also one of only 14 naturalized citizens serving in Congress. We are also joined by Adolfo Flores, National Security Correspondent for Immigration at BuzzFeed, Alida Garcia, Vice President of Advocacy for Forward US, focusing on immigration reform and protecting Dreamers, and Sally Kinoshita, Deputy Director of the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. Such an exciting group today. I'd like to start by turning to Representative Jayapal. Let's start with some context on DACA. So this is a big ruling, and Trump has already announced he's going to refile the case, take another line of attack. Where does this Supreme Court ruling leave us on DACA, and what does it mean for the nearly 800,000 Dreamers who are covered by this ruling?
Emily, it's so great to be with you and all the other wonderful people on this panel who have been working so hard on this issue in so many ways. I would make 3 points about this ruling. Number one, that it is once again a reaffirmation of how this president and his administration has continued to overstep every single step of the way in order to be as cruel as possible to 800,000 young people across this country who deserve to stay in the United States and not be in political limbo anymore. Second, that it is a fairly narrow ruling on administrative procedures. So the reality is that, we organizers, we never celebrate enough. We should celebrate the enormous benefit that this has given to immigrants across this country. But obviously, we need a permanent solution for this as well. And then third, that the permanent solution, which Democrats have put forward over and over again, has already passed the House with unanimous support from Democrats around the Dream and Promise Act. And this president has continually, and I use the word cruel, I've used it before, but to constantly sort of dangle hope in front of people and then do everything in the opposite direction, I think is so outrageous. And what he really should do at this point, and what Mitch McConnell should do, is pass the Dream and Promise Act. Let's have a permanent solution so that we can protect these young people across the country who are just as American as you and me and deserve to be here. And honestly, we've got the country with us, so we should just do that now.
Absolutely. Adolfo, you've been covering this issue and the ins and outs of DACA since the last administration. Can you talk to us a little bit about how we got here?
Yeah, so DACA was created in 2012 after the DREAM Act failed to pass in 2010. Dreamers applied a lot of pressure to the Obama administration publicly and also privately, making the argument that Obama had the power to protect young undocumented immigrants from deportation. And so DACA was the result of that public and private pressure when he announced the creation of the program. Cut to 2017, Trump won the election. He had threatened to end it during his campaign, and then they announced the then Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced that they would be ending the program, winding it down. That was followed by 3 separate lawsuits. Some filed, some of them on behalf of DACA recipients. 3 separate lawsuits that eventually were combined into the case that the Supreme Court ruled on Friday.
So going from looking back to how we got here to looking forward at what's next, Representative Jayapal, you mentioned the American Dream and Promise Act and the urgency of passing a permanent solution and permanent protection for these young people. who may be actually significantly more American than me. But it has passed the House. So can you talk with us about concretely what is in this legislation and what your expectations are for what will happen next?
Well, the legislation covers not only DACA recipients, but also those who are under temporary protected status and EADs, employment authorized immigrants. And so it is a significant portion of people. And basically what we have been saying and what's in the legislation is a pathway to citizenship, legal status, a pathway to citizenship, and the ability for people to continue to stay here, including those who have been deported. I mean, there are a number of other provisions in here that make it the most progressive Dream and Promise Act that we've ever passed. And frankly, you know, we all understand that this is not sufficient, right? I was an immigration activist on the streets for 20 years before coming to Congress, fighting for humane and comprehensive immigration reform, and pushing for DACA to become a program along with the other incredibly courageous dreamers that really led that movement. We know that dreamers are not only fighting for themselves, they're fighting for their parents, they're fighting for their siblings, they're fighting for a whole group of undocumented immigrants that many of whom have been in this country for a long time, many of whom are serving on the front lines, along with 200,000 dreamers who are serving on the front lines of the health crisis right now. But also those immigrants who are picking food and putting food on the table. So this bill is very progressive for a group of individuals, these DACA recipients and TPS recipients, but we do have a broader immigration reform that needs to be passed. Emily, I'm just gonna say that, you know, Mitch McConnell is not the leader of the Senate. The leader of the Senate appears to be Donald Trump. We have no real Senate that operates independently from Trump. Unfortunately, we're supposed to have all three branches here, the House, the Senate, and the administration. But, you know, I think that if Mitch McConnell is interested in doing what is right for the American people, I haven't seen much evidence of that yet, then he would just pass this thing and force the president to sign it with a veto-proof majority. In the event that that does not happen, I think that the president is obviously going to continue to, you know, rattle all of his cages to try to get his base, very small and shrinking base, out on the issue of immigration and dreamers. But it's not only morally wrong, it's political folly. Everybody across the country knows that these young people are important to our country, they're beneficial to our future, and we should keep them here. So, you know, that's what we're gonna continue to push for, and obviously push for a change in the White House and the Senate come November.
So Representative Jayapal, I know you have a very tight schedule and I know we have to let you go in basically 1 minute, but I wanted to squeeze in one last question if you can, if you have time. There was some surprise that Chief Justice Roberts sided with the more liberal justices on both rulings last week. It actually wrote this decision. So I wanted to ask, did that surprise you, and what did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, the two decisions are quite different, and what a great week it was for us, because unfortunately for those of us who, you know, I'm the proud mom of a non-binary kid and have worked on LGBTQ issues for a long time, and often these two things seem to be pitted against each other in that we get one good ruling and one bad ruling all in the same week. This goes back to Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the defeat of the DREAM Act in the Senate, and then later with Shelby and other things. And so, you know, I think that for us, if you look at these two decisions, the first one was a very substantive decision that ruled on equality in a much broader context. And I really do believe that, again, it's the movement and the organizing that has made that issue not a controversial issue anymore across the aisle. And so thank goodness for that. And we have more to do to pass the Equality Act. The DACA decision, Chief Justice Roberts does not like people not following the administrative protocol. And it was clear in the decision that when he calls it, you know, the administration's actions arbitrary and capricious, that he is ruling on the process and the procedure. But at the same time, it is still a big win to have him do that and to have the Supreme Court take process and procedure seriously. And so I do think that it is a significant decision, but it isn't on necessarily the substance and the merit of the issue in the same way that the LGBTQ decision was. So I guess I'm an eternal optimist and hopist as an organizer and a believer in change. You know, I do think that this was a big win for us. We shouldn't downplay it. At the same time, we've got a lot of work to do, and I intend to do it right alongside these amazing, courageous young people who are on the front lines of movement building.
Representative Jayapal, thank you so much. We need to hear from more hopists, as you say, and more eternal optimists. I feel like you've made it easier for me to get through the rest of my day, and I appreciate that so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will
thank you, Emily, and thanks to all the other wonderful participants on the line. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Alida, so can you talk us through what are some of the impacts of this decision on DACA recipients?
Well, I think what's important to note in this decision is that the court basically mandated that things go back to the lower courts, and what they decided stands. And what that means is that right now, the policy should revert pre the DACA rescission by the Trump administration on September 5th, 2017, and go back to the Obama era policy of June 15th, 2012. What that means is, for a high schooler who turned 16 in between 2017 when it was rescinded and now, who's been living in limbo, maybe without hope, wondering if they're going to be protected from deportation or be able to access work authorization to go get a driver's license, et cetera, that those young people should now be able to apply. And so it's important for us to not just skip over that fact and to just resign to the idea that the Trump administration is going to repeal this policy again, because he lost and we spoiled his plans. His plans were, he even admitted this in Tulsa, everyone told him that he was going to win, and then he was going to leverage the pain and suffering of DACA recipients because they have 80% approval from the American public to try to leverage a deal in the United States Congress to cut legal immigration and to separate more families at the border. He has lost, and so now he's scrambling to figure out, can he do this again to still try to move that toxic of a deal through the United States Congress on the backs of DACA recipients? And so there's a lot of confusion right now, like, can people apply? Can they not? When will DHS update their website? Will they not? And so I think we saw over the weekend some really negative insights from the Department of Homeland Security, but it's very unclear as to whether or not that's real policymaking, if it's just posture. There are rumors, it might even have happened all around this call, about an executive order to slash more legal immigration. And so I think we're in a really dynamic time, but what's most important for DACA recipients in this moment in time is that for those in the DACA program, they can continue renewing as they have been to get 2 more years of protections. And the administration must, if they're going to follow through with the Roberts ruling, open up new applications for young folks or folks that never had applied and would have otherwise been eligible to get protected for the next 2 years. And so this is a huge victory that we need to hold on to and push back on to ensure that at least the 66,000 young people who have aged into the program and currently aren't protected have a chance to achieve those protections.
Alida, thank you. Sally, I want to bring you into this conversation, kind of going back to the point where President Trump said on Saturday night that he had won this case and that he was going to refile. So how much of a setback do you think this is for the Trump administration, and how much of a victory for Dreamers? And what would your advice be for them? You know, what's the next confrontation? What does the battlefield look like ahead? Do we have Sally?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I think this is a remarkable setback for the Trump administration. Ending the DACA program was one of his campaign promises, and it has been, of course, in front of the public for the last 3 years as it's wound its way through the courts. And what we found was a reminder to Donald Trump and his administration that despite the fact that there are things a president has the authority to do, he and our federal agencies cannot just make these arbitrary and capricious decisions that don't consider broader policy implications, such as the reliance on the DACA program of the DACA recipients, their families, employers, educational institutions, our communities, etc. So it's not only a remarkable setback for the Trump administration, but as my co-speakers have said, it's really a tremendous victory also for the undocumented youth and their allies who not only fought for the creation of this program, but have fought so hard to defend and protect this program for the past 3 years. On an individual level, we are encouraging potentially eligible DACA individuals to consider renewing their DACA for another 2 years of protection and work authorization, and to do that as soon as possible or as soon as they are eligible. As Alita mentioned, the Migration Policy Institute estimates that there are 66,000 young immigrants who are also eligible and never had a chance to apply before that should be eligible to file an initial application to get DACA for the first time. And so we're waiting for the Department of Homeland Security to make it clear how and when people can apply for DACA for the first time according to the Supreme Court. So we're waiting for that. We are also telling individuals who are eligible or already have DACA that if they've previously been ordered removed by an immigration judge, if they have a criminal record, or if they plan to travel outside the United States, we're really urging them to speak with a trusted legal services provider before moving forward on any of those applications. And on a community level, we're reminding people that although the Supreme Court sided with the DACA recipients, it's important to remember that the Trump administration can again try to end the program through some kind of executive action. In terms of how he'll do that, it's really hard to say. There have been, as Alita mentioned, tweets and USCIS news releases and communication with the media that are kind of all over the place. And if history with this president is any indication, we could see him making a scripted speech in the Rose Garden about next plans, and then the next day attempt to set some kind of policy through tweet that directly contradicts that. So again, if our history with Donald Trump is any indication, what we can anticipate is his attempt to sow chaos and fear and confusion. In the meantime, we know only Congress, through federal legislation, can take some kind of action to create a permanent option for DACA recipients to get green cards and eventually US citizenship. And that would even then only take care of a small percentage of the undocumented population in the United States. So as we fight for better legislation, we really are urging the community to continue demanding that states and local officials protect our communities from immigration enforcement. And as we push for policies, we have to be mindful that we've seen the willingness of DC leaders to tack increased funding for deportation programs onto any proposal that would create permanent protections for undocumented immigrants. And there's typically never any oversight of that expansion. The immigrant community is no longer willing to be used and was never willing to be used as pawns in a political game, and we don't want to be, and we will not be pitted against each other either. So, for example, we are advising the immigrant community to continue standing in solidarity to address the root causes of over-policing and the killing that targets Black people that also feeds into our deportation machine. For some in the immigrant community, there isn't an obvious connection between Black Lives Matter and immigration issues, but what we have seen is that immigration enforcement thrives because of its relationship with law enforcement, and that indeed our issues and the Black Lives Matter issues are very deeply connected.
It's a really interesting connection. And I'd kind of like to bring that back to the stat that Alita cited before about 80%, there being 80% approval for Dreamers being very, very, very popular. And I'd love for you all to weigh in on the following question, which is this: focusing on political will and the sometimes disparate nature of, popular will versus political will. Do you see in your work the political will to create new legislation or broader action to protect Dreamers at this point?
Well, I'll jump in first. I think so that 80% in polling, which polling itself can be debated, but that 80% is around actually legalizing with citizenship this population. But we also have a majority of Americans who want to legalize the entire undocumented population. And so it's not a matter of like political will in terms of if we've already won the public opinion debate. The challenge are the politics in this moment. And so Congresswoman Jayapal has already led in the House and helped pass a great bill that still needs improvement and needs to expand to the broader undocumented community. but would legalize millions of people. And that bill really has zero chance of moving in the Senate. I think what we need to be mindful of when it comes to political will is Donald Trump wants to use this moment to say Democrats don't want to deal on immigration. And the reality is Democrats did try to deal with the Trump administration on immigration multiple times in 2017 and 2018. And Donald Trump's White House blew those deals up even when $25 billion for his wall was on the table in multiple iterations of that deal making. And so we really need to question ourselves every time we hear him talk about immigration, what his real motives are. And the motives of this White House are to redefine America by using our immigration system from a white nationalist perspective. They want to stop as many people of color coming into the United States, and they want to destabilize the lives of immigrants here so that they self-deport and leave because they don't have access into the collective infrastructure of society. And that is what drives every decision that they make along the way. And so Democrats have tried to deal with the Trump administration, but I think we're about to enter a period of the next 30 to 60 days where we hear the president say over and over again, I want to help the dreamers. I want to help the dreamers. It's Democrats who won't deal. And so that's the challenge. There is the political will to pass this bill, but it's not the political will when you have someone who's not genuinely negotiating. And the challenge with the United States Senate is they let the president negotiate on their behalf right now. And that's what's going to need to change in November.
So speaking of November and asking you all as experts and as, political actors and all of that, this is an election year. This is also an election year that's like drowning in subject matter, right? This is an election year with a pandemic and disenfranchisement of voters and a massive uprising over policing and the Black Lives Matter movement. So what's your take on the political cost or the likelihood of Trump, actually trying to rescind DACA in an election year and what the ramifications of that might be? And I would love to hear from each of you on this point, and then we're going to have to close.
I mean, I think what we can sort of expect is, like Alita said, is for Trump to use this all the way through the election because people are very much in support of this group of undocumented immigrants. I believe he sees it as risky. So he will make that argument of, let's try to negotiate with the Democrats and then say, well, they don't want to do anything on this, and then use that to make them look bad, and also give himself some cover for not doing anything with this group.
I would say, again, he has been all over the place in the past, whether or not he loves and supports the Dreamers and is going to support legislation, or whether or not he's targeting them for enforcement, detention, and deportation. He's kind of said all of those things. I do want to say that if he attempts to rescind the DACA program, it would probably have a much slower wind down than the initial time in March 2017 when he tried to end DACA. So people may have a much longer time to maintain or even apply for DACA, and it could even push us into what we would hope it would be a new administration that would be more favorable to the undocumented community. But it's really hard to predict. And again, as I said earlier, I think that his willingness to sow chaos and confusion, and in response to what he thinks is the support from his base, could send him in all sorts of different directions.
Just quickly to close, I think we learned a lot from his Tulsa speech, sadly, on Saturday, around where he's headed on this issue. On immigration, he spent time to say he actually won on DACA, so that speaks to what Adolfo's saying, is he's a little confused about where to land on this issue. But he also talked about undocumented folks accessing healthcare. And the idea right now that in the middle of a global pandemic, that we are going to leave people on the front lines of helping us eat in America to suffer from COVID-19 and not realize that accessing health resources is beneficial. Undocumented immigrants accessing health resources benefits all of our collective health in this moment. Same in meatpacking plants across America. We're seeing this. He is going to play on issues like healthcare, and he is going to play on issues like MS-13 and continue to beat up on asylum seekers at our southern border. And so he has multiple go-tos on immigration, and I think we just threw a wrench in his calculus on how to make them all mix together in winning at the Supreme Court this time. But he will lean into it like he did in 2018, but it was a loser then, and I believe it's going to be a loser again, as we saw suburban women across America reject wholly family separation, and that continues to define his immigration policy. And advocates like myself and others are continue to make it clear that it's a choice. You can choose continued family separation along the border. You can choose deporting DACA recipients, or you can or you can actually build a world where like we don't steal children from breastfeeding mothers, because that's really what this comes down to. And so it's an ugly road ahead, because these are what his instincts are. He launched his campaign on anti-Mexican sentiment in 2015. I have no qualms about where he's headed, but I believe that right now, in following the courageous call of Black organizers in the Black Lives Matter movement, that we are defining who gets to survive in America, and I'm on their team, not on this administration.
Powerfully put, and thank you for that, for those closing remarks. Thank you all so much for joining us and for bearing with us in discussing this incredibly important subject matter. We hope very much to see you all again, and to our viewers, we hope to see you again soon here on The Briefing from Now This and The Appeal.